Was fortunate to get very blunt, honest feedback from a particular administrator that was just kind of like, you know what, you didn't answer the questions. Like,
oh, wow.
That's what you presented to me, and I don't care about that. I care about this. And essentially what he was telling me was like, I kind of just got nervous and rambled and didn't really know how to.
What's up, everyone? I am super excited that you have joined the show today, and we have a treat for you today. We have Dr. Karen Dudek-Brannan from the great state of Illinois on the My K12 Career Show to share her story, her journey, and everything that's going on in her life and in her K12 career. So Dr. Dudek-Brannan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. Can you please share with our viewers what's going on in your life and in your K12 career right now?
Well, I can kind of start from the beginning and share how that led to the current state and what I'm currently doing. So I started out in the schools as a speech pathologist. I did that for 14 years and at the same time was doing lots of different side projects. I like to call them micro experiments to figure out what other things that I might like to do with my career and just find other ways to build up my portfolio of experience. So I was also doing some adjunct assignments at the university. Okay. Part of that was for my special ed doctoral program that I was doing at the same time as I was working in the schools. And I also did a number of projects while I was working as a speech pathologist, where when I was working on my doctorate in special ed, which that was an 8-year period of that 14 years, I had to do some different projects for the director of special ed program. So I was simultaneously getting my doctorate in special ed and then getting my director of special ed credential. And that's why it took so long to finish my doctoral program. I literally used every single, the maximum amount of time that they would let me. And so for that program, I had to often do different leadership projects to prepare me for an administrative role. And so I always would look for opportunities that I could do something above and beyond my role as a speech pathologist, partly for that credential and then partly for just because I saw things that I thought needed to be done. And I didn't really want to wait around for direction to come from the top, because a lot of times people don't know what's going on. A lot of, the people that are working directly with students sometimes know about those issues. So I did that. Let's see, as I said, after that, I finished my doctorate in 2014. I started to think about the next step and was thinking about whether or not I wanted to do maybe a private practice for speech pathology, whether I wanted to do higher ed, whether I wanted to do school administration. And I started at the same time as I was, interviewing and kind of looking around at what was out there. I started creating some of my own courses and trainings, primarily for speech pathologists and related professionals who are working on language and literacy, those supplemental supports of above and beyond what needs to be done in the curriculum. And that really took off before the job search took off. So I started focusing on that and building that up. And so that was 2015. So I built that up at the same time that I was working in the schools. And then in 2018, I decided to focus on that full time. So if you had to put a label on me, I'd say that I'm in the ed tech space. So I would say I'm an ed tech startup. And so primarily what I have done in my business is that I do courses and trainings for people who are on special ed teams, focusing on service delivery in the area of language and literacy and executive functioning. So started out supporting speech pathologists, but really have expanded to focus on that whole special ed team to help those people on those teams design effective services, emerge into a leadership position, even if they're not officially in a leadership position. So
Sure.
really, I'm talking about the speech pathologists, the social workers, the psychologists, the counselors, or anybody who's in an interventionist role, like a special ed teacher, and help them to figure out not just what they're doing in their direct service delivery, so what they're doing when they have a student in a therapy session or a small classroom, but also what they're doing above and beyond that when they're thinking about services. So how are they coaching and training other people that they work with on their teams? How are they providing information to the administration about different programming needs? So those other things that you could categorize as service delivery that aren't direct therapy, and really using that to help them to make changes in their buildings and also just to make the services that they do more effective. So that's what I've been focusing on for,
Wow.
let's see, since 2018. And I'm also thinking about going back to traditional employment in addition to the business, really in that learning and development space, because where my passion lies at the moment is that I want to make an impact on the way that professional development is done in organizations, because I always felt like it was very challenging when it was someone comes and lectures and gives you all this information and it's great and you get all excited and then you go back to work Monday and then you are kind of like, wait a minute, I'm stuck, and there's not that ongoing support. So that's really the area that I'm focusing on making an impact with both my business, and then as the roles that I'm looking at now is just figuring out how to effectively provide people in those roles with the training and support that they need.
That's awesome. So, we have a lot of educators that watch this show that either are already doing some sort of side business. Maybe they want to get into that space.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you share what it was like to get in that space? Because obviously you were working
Mm-hmm.
a traditional job, speech pathologist, working for a school district.
Yep.
And then you pivoted and you started doing your own thing. How hard was it to do that? And, for our viewers, how does that even happen? Like, do you just reach out to individual districts? Do you say, hey, I'm open for business? How does that work?
Oh, man, there's so many different things to it. I would say that the thing that I have focused on the most is figuring out skills that have to do with marketing and sales, which we are all unofficially, if you are in education, you are in marketing and sales, because you have to think about changing people's behavior and getting buy-in. So we are, even if we don't think that we are. But what I did have to learn were some more traditional skills that would help me to be set up for an online business specifically. So things like knowing how to do copywriting for online advertising and blogs and email marketing and social media, how to set up a Facebook ad and all of those types of things. So I had to figure out, how do I set up my website and my services so that if people find me online, they're funneled into the right way. So there was a lot of just back end operations that I had to figure out, like, how do I design this program and figure out what people want before I even got to that stage of driving people in. And I was doing a lot of things like blogging and building an email list. That's what I did first. And that allowed me to have an audience of people that I could ask questions and do market research and figure out, how do I design my courses? And I did know some of that because I was in a position in the schools for 14 years. And I learned just from talking to different people and being in that role myself, what they needed. But then it's a different skill set to figure out how to design a course and a program and structure the curriculum. And then also figure out, when people click on your website, do they know how to go to the different places? And so there's all those types of customer and user experience things that I had to learn before I even got to the point of the marketing aspect. But I did a lot with online marketing and making sure that I knew how to do the writing, because I came from an academic background.
Sure.
Writing a dissertation is very different than writing for a Facebook ad or email marketing. So you do have to learn that. And it is challenging for a lot of people that come from a technical background, because when you're talking to someone in an ad, it should be that somebody that I went through their program in coaching and copywriting, they said, they called it the bar stool test. Like your writing in an ad should be like you're sitting in a bar talking to a friend. It shouldn't be this super technical stuff. So I had to figure out how to switch my language. And I still find that when I write things, the first draft is always way technical, and then I have to go in and make it more conversational. But those are some things that I had to figure out. And then I did have to, once that was built, figure out how to run the ads. And then then I could figure out, who am I reaching out to? I definitely, if I could go back in time, would focus more on the relationships and the networking that I did. But honestly, I was just so overwhelmed with all the different things that I had to learn that I sometimes just had to prioritize and just funnel in on some specific things. So I would say that part of the reason that I launched my podcast was because I had learned all those techie back end, all of the social media type algorithm things, and I wanted to focus more on the relationships. So the podcast has enabled me to do that, because regardless of what type of business you run and all those technical things, you can't really ignore that networking side. So I'm consciously focusing on building those skills up right now. And I think that's something I'll continue to do.
Yeah, it sounds like it's still a work in progress. You actually answered one of the questions I had. Was this just all trial and error, or did you go through a more formal program where you got some support?
Yes, I have gone through lots of programs. The interesting thing about social media algorithms, and you've probably noticed this, you'll be on a website and then you go over to Facebook and then you're seeing that ad, or you're seeing other ads like it. And that's because the way the algorithm works, that Facebook wants people to enjoy being on Facebook. So they're going to use your behavior to show you ads that are similar to what you're searching. Now, things have changed a little bit because people don't like to be stalked on the internet. And a lot of times we'll turn off those privacy settings or turn them on and things like that. But what I found is that I did do some searching on how to start an online business. And the very first program that I took was Ramit Sethi's Zero to Launch, which that program doesn't exist anymore. The program he has now is called Earnable, but that was the first program that I went to that showed me how to do copywriting, how to set up my website, how to start building an email list, and how to start building that first product. And so he used the term minimum viable product. And so basically what that course showed me how to do was do a beta launch, which for people who don't know what that is, it's kind of like a pilot group of people where you create a prototype of something in its very basic form and just get users through it. And then you can kind of iterate and tweak it so that you can build out the whole product. So it's kind of this ready, fire, aim mentality where you don't do this whole big spend a year building this product. You get something together as soon as possible and get real people through it as soon as possible so that you can, number one, be profitable as quickly as possible, but number two, make sure that you're building the product with actual user feedback as soon as you possibly can. So that was the program that showed me how to do that. And then, like I said, with the algorithm, once I took one person's course, I was getting all these ads for this is how you do your Facebook ads, and this is how you do Instagram ads. And so I took a lot of courses. I would say that not all of them were created equally, because that is a very popular space to be in right now. So those people are independent. They're not, anybody now can put out their online course. So you do have to be a good consumer. And I would say that I didn't always get the ROI with those kinds of courses, but I would say that overall I did, just because I've learned a lot of things in the last 8 years about how to do those things. So there are people out there that are selling programs and trainings about how to run a business, and I took advantage of a lot of those. But yeah, I don't think I would have known what to do if I hadn't have started and taken that initial course. It made a huge difference in giving me clarity.
Right. So would you endorse Ramit Sethi? I'm a big follower of his.
Yes, he's fantastic. And he just released a Netflix series. It's called How to Be Rich. And he always jokes around, because he's a copywriting person, about how all of his titles sound kind of scammy, but it's really good. The series does kind of show an overview of the kind of work he does, because he does a lot with the personal finance and then the how to start your business. And so, like I said, the Earnable is the program that has some of the content that I went through, but he's restructured things. So he's a good person that if people are just starting out, that I do recommend. There are a lot of other people that have things that are maybe appropriate once you've started going. Like, I would not recommend people try to start learning Facebook ads if they have no idea what they want to do for their business and don't have a product yet. That just doesn't make sense until you've got some things structured and built out a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's pivot a little bit to your podcast. So you mentioned you have a podcast. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I wanted to start a podcast since I learned what podcasts were. Back when I was doing initially starting the business and was, again, Googling, and I found Ramit. That was when I think the first time I heard him talk was on the Tim Ferriss show. And so I think that was the first podcast that I started listening to. And then you know how it is. People are on there and they listen. They have guests on that have their podcast, and then you end up listening to a lot of shows. So I love podcasts, and I wanted to do something in the ed reform space. And so several years before I even started my show, I kind of had this running list in my head of people that I'd interacted with, leaders that I looked up to, that I always thought that would be so cool to have some of these people on and interview them, and have not gotten to all of them. I still have the list, but I waited. And again, part of it, I wanted to make sure I had the structure of my business set before I even started the podcast. And so I started it back in 2021 in the parenting space, because at that time I had courses and trainings for speech pathologists, and I wanted to expand out to a bigger audience. And I thought that parents would be a good place to shift to. So the original title of the show was Are They 18 Yet? And I did a lot of content related to things like executive functioning and ADHD and autism, and what parents can do in the home to support kids in those areas, in addition to literacy. But you know how things go. Sometimes you start in one direction and then you get pulled back to another direction. And I just, for a number of different reasons in my personal life, in my career, and then based on some of the feedback that I was getting from the people who were already listening to my show, kind of steered back, ended up coming back towards more of a focus of supporting the professionals. And so last summer, this would be 2022, I rebranded the show and got a new title, which is now De Facto Leaders. And so the focus of the show is helping people who are in those therapy, educator roles, aspiring leaders, or maybe people who are already in leadership positions in the schools, and helping them be better leaders, helping them design services that are effective, or just taking their skills as a teacher or a therapist or an administrator and being creative with how they use those skills to make a difference in K-12 education in some way, not just in the school systems, but in their community. So it's the idea of de facto leadership, that you can be a leader no matter what your job title is. Even if someone hasn't officially designated you, you can designate yourself.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. James Altucher wrote a book called Choose Yourself. And that kind of reminds me of that, like de facto leaders. I love that title. I like that first title. Are they 18
I know.
yet? Like,
I didn't want to
parents,
switch. It was so good, but I'll use it later for something else, maybe.
Oh, 100%. You need to keep that. You need to brand that. That is awesome. I love that. It reminds me of that show, Are We There Yet? But are they 18 yet?
Yeah.
Like the parents said, okay. When are they turning 18? Look, I love that. But yeah, it sounds like you have some really good stuff going on. And I'm definitely going to check out your podcast, and we can put that in the show notes so people can connect with you for your show, De Facto Leaders. And hey, I'd love to come on your show. So let me just
we
put
will
that out there.
do that for sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like you're at I don't know, maybe a point where you're going to pivot a little bit and maybe go back into the traditional space, but continue your business.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give to people that are hearing you and watching you right now about how you navigate that? Because, you know, there can be some very gray areas there when you're working for an actual school system, but you're providing services to other school systems and things like that. Like, how do you navigate all that?
So where I've landed after being in lots of different places is I am just a fan of options and flexibility and just being open to the idea of doing what I like to refer to as micro experiments. And I think that when you are in one place, working for a school district, for example, it's easy to look at somebody else's job or somebody else's role and think the grass is greener. It's easy to look at when you're in traditional employment and look at people who are self-employed and think they have all this freedom and flexibility. There's this whole, again, when you're looking at these courses of people who are selling how to start your online business, it's this whole message around drink margaritas on the beach while you're making money in your sleep and all of that. But the thing is that all of it is hard work. All of it has benefits and drawbacks. And it's not a matter of this is the best situation. Sometimes you're finding the best situation for you right now. And sometimes it's whether it's like this is good or this is bad. It's not really better or worse. It's just different. And so it could be what works for you right now could be something that was not right for you 5 years ago. And so I do see a lot of people when they're navigating career transitions in education, and they have a lot of shame and regret. Like, what if I made the wrong decision? This job that I'm in right now, I'm feeling a little bit, dissatisfied, burnt out, maybe a little bit bored and disengaged from my work. And then there's this, did I pick the wrong field? And a lot of times, no, you didn't pick the wrong field. It just, maybe it's time for a shift. Maybe it's time to change the way that you're thinking about the role that you're currently in. And maybe that will give you some clarity on where to go next. And so I think that can change. And there's not really one perfect solution. There are challenges and benefits to every single solution. And what I want to do for myself is know how to navigate all those situations. I want to know how to be a good employee. I also want to know how to have the skills to be self-employed and utilize those options. I want to learn how to be in a position where, that might be known for having a lot of bureaucracy. And then I also think it's really interesting to know how the startup world works, where it's a lot different. So I think that understanding all of these different systems and knowing how to be flexible and kind of jump into all of these situations, even if you don't want to do all of it at once, because that's very hard to do. Sometimes you have to just make a choice and say, this is what I'm focusing on right now. And then maybe I'll, once I get comfortable and I'm ready to move to the next thing, then I'll think about something else. But just that idea of flexibility and understanding that it's normal to have different stages in your career. It's normal to do something for a while and then want something different. Or I think you could be flexible with how you use your skills. There are a lot of people in education that are learning ways to start businesses on the side or take their skills as an educator and switch to another type of setting or position. And then there's other people who are in education and they're realizing that, maybe they wanted to teach this grade level, maybe they wanted to be a therapist, but then they're realizing that they could move into some other leadership role and make an impact in a different way that wasn't something they were initially thinking of. And I think that it is kind of challenging when people ask the question of where do you see yourself in 5 years, because I'm always off, I have a general idea. I think you should ask, like, where do you see yourself in a year, or what do you want to be doing for the next 90 days? It is hard to know.
True.
So that's what I'd say is just be flexible, be open to options, and give yourself options and understand that every option is a choice. And I caution people from having rose-colored lenses about different situations, but I also just, like people to understand the challenges of all these different options so that when you get into that situation, you can be successful and feel excited about the work that you do.
Yeah, well, we're definitely kindred spirits in that regard. I just felt the fear and I just jumped right in and started my podcast back in 2015. And then I pivoted, during the pandemic and said, you know what, everybody has to use Zoom or some sort of video service, for schooling now. So I'm going to jump into the video space, and I just hit recorded and start talking to phenomenal educators like yourself. But I'm really grateful that you came on the show, and I started this podcast and ultimately this video show to showcase quick educators like yourself. And I really believe that we're the profession that makes all other professions possible. But can you share with us maybe a teacher, a counselor, or a school administrator that had a positive impact on your life?
So let's see. I was actually thinking about this before we hit record. So that's what popped in my head. I'll go with it. So when I was interviewing for school administration roles, I found that it was way more competitive and challenging than interviewing for SLP roles, just because the number of jobs is different. So when I finished my doctorate, I had an amazing committee. They were my chair, and all the people on the committee were so supportive. And, anybody who's gone through a graduate program and has had to do a master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation knows that your committee makes a big difference, and not everybody gets along with their committee. So I had this wonderful committee that just really built me up. And so my chair was always kind of like, you're going to be so amazing in any role that you're in, which is really great to have those people in your life. But when you go into these other roles and you're interviewing, those people don't necessarily have that perspective. And I interviewed for this position. And a lot of times when you're interviewing, you ask for feedback and they don't really give you real feedback. They give you sort of fluff answers like, we went with this other really competitive candidate, blah, blah, blah. And I was fortunate to get very blunt, honest feedback from a particular administrator that was just kind of like, you know what, you didn't answer the questions. Like, oh, wow, that's what you presented to me, and I don't care about that. I care about this. And essentially what he was telling me was like, I kind of just got nervous and rambled and didn't really know how to use my STAR format and talk about specific results, but really read the room and understand that. And everybody was telling me how amazing I was and blah, 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 and all that, which is great. I mean, I think you need those people, but nobody was giving me honest feedback about the things that I wasn't doing. Even there were a couple other people on that interview committee that gave me this like, oh, you did a good job, but just work on this. And I understand why they did that, because some of them were people I directly reported to. And so you've got to maintain that rapport in the relationship. But I always think about that. And I'm really grateful that one person just told me the things that I was doing that weren't coming across the way that I would have wanted, because a lot of times you don't get that honest feedback. So that's true. It really was hard to hear at the time, but I'm really grateful for it, because I never would have known how much I needed to work on my interviewing skills and how much I needed to work on just the way that I presented myself. Because as we were talking before, it is very different from the school administrator's perspective, the micro versus the macro. And I really had a lot of learning that I needed to do to learn that. And so I'm grateful to that. And it's something that I continue to work on, but I'm glad that somebody told me the truth when I needed to hear it.
That's powerful. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. And you're right. I mean, I've always had this belief that particularly when you get to the admin level, like 50% of those positions that you apply and interview for, they already know who they want.
Yeah.
Literally already know who they want. And the other 50%, like you said, even though you know what you bring to the table, they don't know you, right? And so if you don't present yourself in such a way very quickly and in a very, very short amount of time that you're the right person, it can be really tough and really challenging. And I actually just went through an interview process for a district level position, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Oh, job searching and interviewing is definitely a resilience building activity for sure.
100%. You better have some thick skin and get used to getting told no a little bit. So yeah, that's really true. But how long have you been doing this?
The job?
K12. Yeah, K12, the whole deal.
Since 2004, so what, 19 years?
19 years. Wow, 19 years. So I'm going to ask you this question. If you could go all the way back, 20 years ago, while you were still in college and all that, would you still have, matter of fact, let's go back about 24 years when you were deciding whether or not you need to go into speech pathology and as a major, would you do it all over again?
I mean, I've thought about that and it's so hard to answer. I would say that if people ask me about the job and the challenges, I'm honest with them about the things that I did and didn't like.
Sure.
But I mean, it's hindsight. I think about things that I wish I would have known last year and I can't change it. So, you know, I think that when I look back, whenever I'm in a position and I feel regret about certain things, I don't know that it's the most useful way to think. So I would say no, just because you don't know what you don't know. And you can really get stuck in sunk cost in hindsight. I even sometimes feel like with getting the doctorate where I'm like, oh, like nobody cares, like sometimes you go into a position and they hire somebody that has less education and experience than you, but maybe they were the person in line for the job, or people have different perceptions about your background. So I would say no, just because wherever I end up in the next stage is a compilation of all the things I've done up until this point. There are things where when I've been over to the business and the corporate side of things, or when I've been in the school administration position, there are ways that I'm going to be able to pull those experiences that are unique to me, that aren't what other people did. So it's like, I'm going to choose to use those experiences to my advantage, because that's really all you can do. And, I think about, should I have gone into a field like marketing or communications where I could have gone into a corporate role and been in, those types of positions? But I know people that are in those roles that are like, sometimes I wish I had some very specific skill set like you have. And those people have that regret too. So I don't think you can avoid that feeling of coulda, woulda, shoulda. I think your choice is just to move forward. So I would say, no, I don't regret it, but I always tell people what it's about and the challenges and the benefits, and how I'm feeling about my job could change from one day to another as far as how optimistic I am. But no, I think that I ended up in the right place, and that's what I'm going to go with going forward as far as how I think about it.
I totally agree with you. I was a pre-law major on my way to law school, and I have friends that are lawyers, judges, all that, because that was my world at one time. And they tell me all the time, you made the right decision. Because sometimes I'm doubting myself. I'm like, man, I could have been a lawyer. I could have, been a judge. Who knows, But I just feel like, there's an old saying, if you want to make God smile, tell him your plans, because he might have other plans for you. So,
yeah, that's so true.
Well, Dr. Karen Dudek-Brannan, I am super grateful that you came on the My K12 Career Show. And I'm very grateful. I know that a lot of what you shared today, our viewers are going to get a lot of value out of it. But before you leave, would you please just share some parting words of wisdom? Tell us how we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
Okay, so if you would like to learn more about the De Facto Leaders podcast, you can go to drkarendudekbrannan.com/blog. I have a number of different episodes, from school improvement to things that will help students be more effective in their ability to read, and I have a lot of content on executive functioning and language processing. Awesome. So there's a lot of information for school teams on those topics. I also have a free guide where I do walk through some things that school teams can think about when it comes to supporting executive functioning. And so I don't use this term in there, but if you're interested in things like universal design and really figuring out just, at the tier 1 level, how you can provide supports that are also going to be helpful all the way through the tiers of support in the school systems, I recommend checking out that guide. Or if you have students who are struggling with things like some of those academic skills, behavioral issues, mental health issues, I tie in how it relates to those types of things. So that guide, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/EF leadership to download a free copy of that guide. Let's see, parting words of wisdom. I think a lot of times people feel like somebody else has all the power in a lot of the situations that they're in. So for example, a parent might feel like the school therapist is making all the decisions for their child, and that person has all the power. And then the therapist feels like the building principal has all the power in making the administrative decisions. And then the school administrators think the school board has the power, and so on. And so it just keeps going further and further up the chain. So I would encourage people to just realize that we all really need to be on the same team here. I think that we all really want what's best for kids. And regardless of your position, you always have a choice in the way that you show up. You can always think of yourself as a leader and make an impact. And I think that coming forward with that mindset can help you be in a better place to really have a relationship with those other people and figure out what your choices are so that you can feel empowered in whatever situation that you're in.
Well said, Dr. Karen Dudek-Brannan. You were a great interview. I am so grateful that you came on the show, and we'll make sure we get all of your information, put it in the show notes so people can reach out to you. And I will accept your invitation and come on your show, but Thank you for coming on my show, and we definitely wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.